In the video, Playing with the Elements of Players Part 1, we looked at 1v1, 2v2, and 3v3. One of the key points that we made in those sizes and in that video is that when you add or subtract a player, the game can change considerably. In the series of 4v4, we looked at how that size of the game is considered by many coaches to be an ideal form for learning the game. It's the smallest form of soccer where you have all the elements, all the basic tasks and roles can be learned in a small-sided format. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what happens when you combine these two elements, the ideal size and adding a player. So in 5 versus 5, the first question you have to answer is this: just who are you adding? Because at this size, a lot of times that extra player is going to be a goalkeeper. Adding a goalkeeper does change some things. I mean, there's going to be a larger goal, probably a larger field. But for the players on the field, it's not going to be that big a deal. And here's why. Because the goalkeeper has a very unique role. It's a specialized role, and it's limited by the laws of the game. The goalkeeper is the only one that can use their hands in that area. And so that limits the goalkeeper in terms of their mobility and the way that they can join in the rest of the team in play. So you don't find goalkeepers, for the most part, going up here to play left midfield and then having the left midfielder drop back. This limits the goalkeeper to this role. It's a key role, it's an important role, but for the players on the field, the way they would play in 4 versus 4, they can play in 5 versus 5 with the goalkeeper. In a diamond, the 2-1 that we saw, or in a box. This is a common system that you'll see a lot in futsal. But the players' basic roles don't really change. Now what happens when you bring that 5th player onto the field? Well, we're going to use the diamond system here, the 1-2-1, as the template for this discussion. And we have the 4 players out, and each player understands their role. They understand 1 plays back, 2 play wide, 1 plays up. They understand mobility, they'll interchange positions, and that's all well and good. But here comes the 5th player. They have to go somewhere. And we'll start them out in the back. Well, as soon as they come off the sideline and onto the field, playing alongside the sweeper's job has just been duplicated. There's another player out there doing their job. And what happens now is that the original sweeper only has half of the space that they need to cover, while the new player will cover the other half. This has an influence on the midfielders, because now, with 2 players behind them, the midfielders don't have as much of a responsibility to cover backwards. As a matter of fact, they should be able to actually play a little bit higher and leave these 2 players to do a lot of the defending on their own, to cover for each other. And what you end up with is this 2-3 formation. Now we take the 5th player and we put him up top. Well, we have the same situation. Now you have the duplication of the striker's role, and the player only has to cover, half as much space, while the other player covers the other half. But now the situation for the midfielders is they don't have as much space to move forward into. So for them, the supporting roles will probably be a little bit more behind the ball, while the 2 strikers are able to play more in front of the ball. So the irony of this is, if you add the player to the back, on paper, it's going to be a more attacking formation, a more attacking system. If you add the player to the front, it should be a more balanced towards the defensive side. Now there's one other place we can put this player, the 5th player, and that is in the midfield line. And since we already have a left and a right, the only place to put the player is in the center. And of course they can interchange positions and all that. So what's the effect here? Well, what will happen is that the team size will start to get a little bit larger, especially when they are in possession of the ball. Basically, this is what happens. There's an ideal distance between the sweeper and the striker. That's a distance where this player can get the ball to that player comfortably. Under control, it's actually a pass and not just a boot. When you're playing 4 versus 4, the distance will be smaller. The same thing with the midfielders. They're going to need to support each other so they can't play as far apart. When you put the 5th player into the center, now they can play through this central player, so the distances can become greater. So in essence, this player now is going to reduce the space, reduce the field size that the left midfielder and the right midfielder need to cover. They don't need to come so far into the center. They can concentrate more on the flanks, and they can play wider. Meanwhile, the striker, the top player, can play deeper, and the sweeper can play a little bit farther back. Now what happens when you go to 6 versus 6? The vast majority of the times now you are talking about a goalkeeper. And the same thing will apply 6 versus 6 that we saw going from 4v4 to 5v5. That for the field players, there won't be that much of a change. Whatever system, whatever agreement the players have on the field, they'll be able to play and just follow that pattern. Now the big deal here is this, is that when you bring the 5th player on, in 4 versus 4, one player, one role, one task, no duplication whatsoever. Right, left, top, back. The 5th player now will duplicate one or more of those roles. As soon as there's duplication, you need a lot more in the way of insight and communication between the players with the duplicated tasks. It's also going to impact space on the field, as we saw in the 2 examples. So 5 versus 5 has a tremendous impact on the game from 4 versus 4 because of that. The demands on insight and communication. Just think of it this way. If you're playing singles tennis, you have the entire court, you know what you have to do, you're responsible for everything. But when you're playing doubles, suddenly you have someone else you have to work with. And that person, now, you're going to have to read their game, they have to read yours, and you have to work together. The players that work together the best will have a better chance of getting a good result.